Long before history was chained to the parchment of conquerors, before it was trapped in the cold rigidity of ink and stone, it lived a wild and breathing existence in the breath of the people. In the heart of the ancient pre-Roman world, among the Celtic, Germanic, and Iberian tribes that blanketed Europe, the oral library was not a physical structure. It was a living, breathing sanctuary of collective memory. It was an institution built not of marble columns and silent reading rooms, but of crackling hearth fires, rhythmic poetry, and the unbreakable bonds of kinship. Here, in the smoky warmth of winter roundhouses, the past was continually summoned into the present, fighting an invisible war against the passage of time and an encroaching empire. The architecture of the spoken word, learning history through story. To the modern mind, history is a subject to be studied, a collection of dates, names, and geopolitical shifts recorded in textbooks. But for the tribes of the ancient world, learning history was a deeply immersive, communal, and spiritual experience. The oral library was vast, its volumes memorized by specialized bards, druids, and elders who trained for decades to perfect their craft. In the oral library, history was never a static record of the dead. It was a living spell cast over the young to weave them into the eternal fabric of their people. Learning was achieved through the mesmerizing power of story. Because the human brain is wired for narrative, historical facts were intricately woven with myth, melody, and rhythm. The mnemonic power of verse. Epic poems and songs were not merely entertainment, they were sophisticated mnemonic devices. Rhyme, alliteration, and repetitive meters acted as structural frameworks, ensuring that a tale could be passed down through 10 generations without losing its core truths. Myth as historical pedagogy. Gods and legendary heroes served as vessels for historical realities. A story about a sky god battling a water serpent might encode practical knowledge about seasonal floods, while the tale of a tragic hero's last stand preserved the brutal lessons of a historical battle. A shared identity. Listening to these stories was a participatory event. When the storyteller spoke of an ancestral triumph or a bitter defeat, the listeners did not just hear it, they felt it. The blood of the ancestors pulsed in their veins, forging a fierce, unbreakable cultural identity that bound the tribe together against outside threats. The weavers of time, the central role of women. While history often highlights the male chieftains and warriors whose swords clashed on the battlefield, the true custodians of the oral library were frequently the women. In societies where memory was the ultimate currency, women held a profound and revered form of wealth and power. They were the matriarchs of memory, the quiet architects of the tribe's enduring soul. Women operated as the primary educators and historians within the domestic sphere, which, in the ancient world, was the very center of life. Their role in the oral library was multifaceted and deeply ingrained in the daily rhythms of existence. Keepers of lineage. A tribe's claim to land, alliances, and social standing relied entirely on genealogy. Women were the encyclopedias of bloodlines. They memorized the intricate webs of marriages, births, and ancestral deeds, singing these genealogies as lullabies to infants, ensuring a child knew exactly who they were before they could even walk. Preservers of law and lore. Customary law, the rules that governed blood prices, property, and dispute resolution, was passed down orally. Elder women often acted as judges and mediators, recalling precedents from generations past to settle present conflicts. Custodians of the earth. Medical knowledge, the properties of herbs, the patterns of the stars, and the rites of the changing seasons were stories passed from mother to daughter. This was not just biology or astronomy, it was a sacred historical relationship with the land itself, preserved through spoken lore. Far from being relegated to the shadows of history, these women were the indispensable bridges between the ancestors and the unborn. If a tribe lost its warriors, it could rebuild, but if it lost its mothers and grandmothers, the keepers of the stories, the tribe would cease to exist in spirit, becoming a people with no past and, consequently, no future. The shadow of the eagles, the creeping Roman threat. Yet a dark and methodical shadow was lengthening across the continent. Originating from the Mediterranean, the creeping Roman threat brought with it the relentless, mechanical march of the iron legions. But Rome's most dangerous weapon was not the gladius, sword, or the pilum, javelin. It was the written word. The clash between Rome and the tribal world was not merely a war of territory, it was an existential collision of paradigms. Rome operated on the cold, rigid authority of texts, edicts, and imperial records. They understood that to truly conquer a people, you did not just break their armies, you erased their memories. The weaponization of history. Rome sought to overwrite the soul of the conquered tribes. The empire's historians, men like Caesar and Tacitus, wrote the history of the barbarians from the viewpoint of the conqueror. They aimed to replace the passionate, spoken truths of the native peoples with sterile, often biased imperial records. In the Roman worldview, if it was not written down, it did not exist. Cultural assimilation. The threat crept in slowly. First came the legions, then the roads, then the laws, and finally the language. As Latin became the language of trade and legal survival, the native tongues began to fray. And when a language dies, its oral library burns. The ancient songs lost their rhythm, the mythic genealogies lost their meaning. Roman administrators dismissed the matriarchs of memory as mere superstitious peasants, deliberately undermining the social structure that kept the oral traditions alive. An existential dread. For the keepers of the oral library, the creeping Romanization was terrifying. It was the threat of damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory on a civilizational scale. The bards and the elder women understood that if their voices were silenced, thousands of years of triumphs, tragedies, and hard-won wisdom would vanish into the void, replaced by the clinical ledgers of a foreign emperor. The lasting embers. As the Roman eagles gathered on the horizon and fortresses of stone began to scar the sacred landscapes, the keepers of the stories did not go quietly. In the deep forests, in the hidden glens, and around the defiant fires of the unconquered territories, they whispered their truths a little more fiercely. They poured their entire souls into the next generation, weaving the magic of the past into the minds of the youth. They knew that empires of stone and iron would eventually crumble into dust, but a story, deeply planted in the heart of a child, could survive the fall of Rome itself. The oral library was under siege, but as long as one woman remembered the song of her grandmother, the flame would never truly be extinguished.